and it's also kind of a love triangle between two brothers. I know, very Vampire Diaries of Lauren Roberts. Like, he literally buys her a coffee shop at one point because they stop making the scone that she likes. Like, if that isn't love, I don't know what is. If you have not started the Boys of Tommen series yet, this is your sign too, because what are you doing with your life if it isn't reading Boys of Tommen? Welcome back to my channel. So today's video is super fun, which is my March reading wrap up. So before we get into the meat of this video, let's talk about my reading stats. So during the month of March, I read 8 books. 4 of those books were physical copies, and then the other 4 were actually ebooks. In total, I read 2,915 words. And categorizing all 8 books by genre, 3 of them were fantasy, 1 was a thriller, and then 4 were romance books. As for my average rating, it was a little bit odd. It was a 4.4 stars, but I'm taking that as I had a really good reading month because 4.4 is pretty high. That's like really close to 4.5. And then I also had 1 5-star read this month. So let's get into it. So the first book I read in March was a highly anticipated read, and it was The Rebel Witch by Kristen Ciccarelli. This is an adult fantasy between a witch and a witch hunter. This is actually the second book in the duology, so it is also the final book, I guess. And I don't think I can give you guys a synopsis just because I don't want to spoil anything, but basically the entire series is about Rune and Gideon. It is dual POV, and Rune and Gideon live in this kingdom that used to be ruled by witches, but then it was overthrown by this different government, and it is basically illegal to be a witch, to sympathize with witches. And Gideon is the head witch hunter. He hates witches. He literally killed like 2 of the witch queens. And Rune is a witch living in plain sight. She has this act of being like a ditzy heiress that doesn't care about anything but frivolous things like dresses and money and status and things like that. However, she has this like huge secret, which is that she is the Crimson Moth. So basically the Crimson Moth is this like anonymous figure that helps witches escape to their freedom. Think like Harriet Tubman, but like in a fantasy setting and for witches. But their story does not stop there. So Gideon has a suspicion that Rune may be the Crimson Moth. So he decides to like fake court her to kind of gain information and to make sure that she is not guilty. And then Rune has kind of hit a dead end with her sources of information, and she has decided to put herself in basically a marriage of convenience to help further her cause, which is why she decides to court Gideon as well. So it's like this deceptive courtship that is going on, and it is so much fun. I ended up rating this book a 4.75. It was absolutely amazing. It did not disappoint. It was the perfect ending of Rune and Gideon's story, and I just absolutely ate it up. I literally finished it in one day. It was so addicting. It was so action-packed. And honestly, this duology is my petition for fantasy authors to write more duologies, because never did I once feel like something was stagnant. I felt like something was always progressing, something was always going on, and I loved it. I honestly don't know why more people don't write duologies, because I feel like a little stereotype with trilogies is that the second book is always a filler book, and duologies remedy that issue like immediately because there is no middle book. There's just the first one and the last one, and I love that. I'm not gonna lie, some of the plot twists were a little bit predictable, but I honestly did not care. I just loved the characters and the universe so much, and I'm pretty sure Kristen Ciccarelli has a new release coming, but it isn't coming until like 2028, and I don't know what I'm gonna do with that information. Like, I need more books from her now. So moving on, the next book I read was The Boyfriend by Freida McFadden. I actually read this on my Kindle because it's free if you have Kindle Unlimited, and it is a thriller because Freida McFadden is like the queen of thrillers in my eyes. So basically this book is about Sydney Shaw, and like every other woman living in New York, she has terrible luck with dating. She's seen it all. Men who are lying on their dating profiles, who have her call their mother, just like all these horrible date stories. But finally, she hits the jackpot. Her new boyfriend is basically perfect. He's charming, he's handsome, he's a doctor, he works at a local hospital. What could go wrong? Except her friend was mysteriously murdered without a trace. And Sydney soon finds out that her friend's murder is not just a one-off. There are multiple cases like hers of young women being brutally murdered. And who is the primary suspect? The mystery man that they were all dating. So obviously Sydney should feel safe. She should feel fine because she's dating this dream guy, but she can't help but let these like suspicions and anxieties speak to her, and just feels like someone is watching her moves. And yeah. So this book really gave me You vibes, that show from Netflix that like everyone was obsessed with, and I honestly liked the show, I'm not gonna lie, but I had to stop watching it because it got to me. It gave me the heebie-jeebies and I just couldn't do it anymore, but that is the vibe that this book definitely gives. It definitely keeps you on your toes and you're second guessing yourself, and I just love that. I ended up rating this book a 4.5. I am usually not a thriller person. However, I really wanted to read something different after reading The Rebel Witch. I just needed like a palate cleanser, and I definitely was not disappointed by picking this book up. It was everything I wanted and more. It was super fast paced. It was like gripping my attention. I just did not want to put it down, and it is dual POV. So we get Sydney's POV, which is our main female character, but we also get these POVs from the man that she is dating. I forget his name, but we get his POVs, but in the past. So we kind of learn about his backstory, but we don't get anything from him present day. And it's just so good. I'm not gonna lie, I honestly thought I had the plot twist figured out. Like I had evidence, research, all the stuff to back it up. I probably could have written like a 5-page paper on it. And the plot twist did get me. And it made sense. I don't know why, but actually I know exactly why. My biggest pet peeve with thrillers is when the plot twist does not make any sense. And it's just a huge twist to just be a huge twist. It just doesn't make sense. And the plot twist in this book made sense. And I loved that. So the third book I read during March was Keeping 13 by Chloe Walsh. This is the second book of the Boys of Tommen series, and it is also the conclusion of Johnny and Shannon's story. So if you do not know, Boys of Tommen is basically an interconnected series. Each couple gets 2 books. So the first 2 books, Binding and Keeping 13, are about Johnny and Shannon. And this is technically a YA book, but it is very, very heavy. So I would honestly categorize it as new adult. I don't think it's just purely YA. I feel like you need to be at least 16 years or older to read this series, but that's honestly just my opinion. It is a rugby romance. It's a high school romance. It takes place in Ireland, so there is some different slang and the school terms are different, things like that. And it is also very much found family. That is like one of the main reasons why I love this series. And lastly, it is very much character driven. So this is about Johnny and Shannon. Like I said, Shannon, she has been bullied her entire life, which is why she decides to transfer to Tommen College. She just really needs like a fresh start. Johnny is the star rugby player at Tommen College. He's very popular. He is like the king of the school basically. And from the get-go, they just have this like connection that can't really be explained. And despite trying to stay away from each other, they just can't. And yeah, it is very much slow burn and friends to lovers. I forgot to mention that earlier. But when I say slow burn, I mean like slow burn, okay? It is not for the faint of heart, but if you love Mariana Zapata and you love a good slow burn, I feel like you would also love this series. So this was actually my 5-star of the month. I absolutely love this book. It was kind of the book that solidified my love for the series. Like, do not get me wrong, I really liked Binding 13, but I wasn't like totally obsessed with Johnny and Shannon. I wasn't totally obsessed with the characters. This book made me obsessed. Like, I still think about this book every single day. I think about Johnny and Shannon every single day. I think about all the characters actually every single day because I just love them all and I cannot wait to continue the series. Like I mentioned earlier, the romance and the relationship between Johnny and Shannon is very much slow burn, and we do get a lot more romance in this book, which is why I think I liked it so much. Like, the romance definitely picks up. So if you're like in the middle of Binding 13 and you're like, I don't know if I can do it anymore, take this as your sign to just stick with it because it gets better, I promise. Again, this book is very, very heavy, but I absolutely adored the wholesome friendship moments of Shannon hanging out with her friends, with Johnny and Gibbsy. Like, they feel so real to me. They feel like real people that I could just see on the street, and I love that. I'm not gonna lie, I did bawl like a baby when this book ended. The last like 100 pages just really get you, and it was an emotional roller coaster. I don't know how else to explain it. It was so devastating and so heartbreaking, but then Chloe Walsh does this amazing thing where she just like puts you back together again, and I loved it. I loved every single minute of it. If you have not started the Boys of Tommen series yet, this is your sign to, because what are you doing with your life if it isn't reading Boys of Tommen? So moving on, the next book I read was Reckless by Lauren Roberts. This is a young adult fantasy, and it is also the second book in the Powerless trilogy. Essentially, this series is about Peyton, who lives in this magical kingdom where it is illegal to not have powers. If you're caught not having powers or harboring someone who doesn't have powers, you will be executed. And Peyton is living with this huge secret, which is that she has no powers. And one day she's kind of entered into this competition, which is kind of like Hunger Games. It's just this like huge spectacle for the rich people, and it's very much rigged, and it's a series of survival of the fittest competitions, things like that. And she's just like faking it until she makes it, and I absolutely loved it. Powerless was a 5-star for me. So this is a continuation of her story. The series does have a very huge subplot of romance. It's very much giving enemies to lovers, and it's also kind of a love triangle between two brothers. I know, very Vampire Diaries of Lauren Roberts, but I ended up rating this book a 3.75. I feel a little bit conflicted when it comes to this book, just because, do not get me wrong, I really did enjoy it. I literally finished it in one sitting. I think that just shows how addictive and how hooked I was onto the story. But I feel like this book had no plot. I feel like it was a little bit of a filler book. It was very much them roaming the desert for I don't even know how many pages, and it would have gotten old if I hadn't loved Lauren Roberts' writing style so much and just completely adored the characters and the world that she has built. Looking back, I do think this book is a little bit more character driven than I expected. I feel like when I go into a fantasy, I just expect high stakes, a lot of action, a lot of drama. But the point of this book is really just to hone in on Peyton and Kai's relationship and this like cat and mouse dynamic that they have, this like forbiddenness in their relationship. And I ate it up. Like, do not get me wrong. But again, here is my conflict. Here is my confusion. It just felt like there was no need for all this. I feel like this series could have been just a duology, and this entire book could have been summed up in like 100 pages in the final book. That's how I feel. I feel really bad being really negative, but also this is like how I felt. This is my honest review. Am I going to continue the series? Obviously. Is this series probably still a 5-star series for me? Yes. I feel like if it came down to it and I really did not enjoy this book, I would have rated it like 1-2 stars, but I rated it basically almost a 4-star, and I feel like that speaks volumes. So the next book I read was actually on my Kindle, and it was Saving Six by Chloe Walsh. After finishing Keeping 13, I was just like itching to continue the series, and so I decided to pick up Saving Six even though I had no physical copy. Luckily, the entire series is on Kindle Unlimited, so love that for me. Even though this is the third book in the series, we are focusing on a new couple, Joey and Alfie. We see them a lot in Binding and Keeping 13, but obviously in Saving Six we get both of their POVs. One thing that I did not know going into this book is that the entire book of Saving Six is all past chapters. We are literally following Joey and Alfie throughout their entire school years. So they're like 12 when we first start the book, and then we end the book and they're like 18. So it is basically, in a nutshell, their like backstory, their lore. I would categorize their romance, their relationship as friends to lovers, but like in a very flirty friend type way. Like they're friends, but they're really towing that line between being friends and being boyfriend and girlfriend, and they don't really know it. That kind of thing. It is also a little bit slow burn, but not in the way that Johnny and Shannon's books are. Like, Johnny and Shannon's books are slow burn. Like, there's no romance in sight, okay? Whereas Joey and Alfie's slow burn is like, when will they get together? Like, we all know you like each other. We all know that you want to get together. It's just like, when are you going to cross over that boundary? When are you going to cross over that line of friendship that you drew in like pencil? And dry erase marker, not even pencil, dry erase marker, okay? When are you gonna tiptoe over that line? So I ended up reading this book a 4.75. I absolutely loved it. I'm not gonna lie, it was very, very close to being a 5-star, but I was kind of holding off because I just have this gut feeling that Redeeming Six is going to be a 5-star read. And so that's why I'm just like, maybe I'm gonna be a little bit harsher and not give you a 5-star because I just know Redeeming Six is gonna bring it. Like, I don't know, I can't explain it fully, but that's just like my weird reasoning on why this didn't have a 5-star. I also didn't know going into this book that it was all going to be in the past. So the entire book I was like, okay, when are we gonna get present day chapters? And I think that's also kind of goes into why it wasn't a full 5 stars for me. But I won't lie, Joey and Alfie hit differently for me, okay? Compared to Johnny and Shannon, I just feel like the romance took place a lot quicker, a lot sooner, and I wasn't kept like waiting for them to get together. It definitely still had slow burn tendencies because it did take a while for Joey and Alfie to get together, but they always had like that flirtation, that chemistry, and I just ate that up. Like, Joey and Alfie meet on the first day of school, and mind you, they're like 12, 13 at this point, and Joey says to Alfie, nice legs. Nice legs. Like, oh my gosh, I was literally like cackling when that happened. I honestly just loved being in Joey's POV. I feel like we get this whole different story from his lens, from his perspective, and it's so interesting to see all the different nuances in these retellings and these recollections of what happened, because obviously we saw it in Shannon's, but there are just so many small differences in how Joey feels compared to Shannon and how he views his relationship with Shannon and how Shannon views Joey. It's just so mind-boggling. I low-key loved it. Honestly, not gonna lie, it did feel a little repetitive at times, but I feel like when I was going to this book, I knew it was very much character-driven, and I just loved the characters so much that honestly, I didn't care that the same thing was happening over and over again. Like, was it a little bit frustrating? Yes, but it was so worth it because I just love Joey and Alfie so much. So moving on, the next 2 books I read were actually novellas, the first being The Six Deaths of the Saint by Alix E. Harrow. This is a fantasy novella, and it was actually recommended to me by a friend. She is a huge fantasy reader, so any fantasy recs that she gives me, I take to heart and I go and read them. Compared to me, she is like a pro when it comes to fantasy, okay? That is how much she reads it. That's like the only thing she reads, and I love that for her. I also love that for me because I get amazing recs. But this book centers around this girl who is basically like recruited by this prince one day, and she comes from nothing, and she's basically trained to be this like crazy deadly soldier. I don't really know how to describe it. I guess what I'm trying to say is that she's like a prodigy when it comes to combat and fighting. She leads armies into victories, and she just does a lot for the kingdom and for the prince. However, the story really focuses on like, is it worth it? Is destroying yourself and pushing yourself time and time again worth all these accolades and these songs of the bards that sing for you and these praises from people who don't even know you? Like, it is just so beautifully written, and it's such a really interesting world and magic system in such little pages. Like, it's literally only 30 pages. I ended up actually changing my rating. I originally rated it like a 3.75 and I changed it to a 3.5, and I don't think it's because I did not enjoy it. I think I was just overestimating how much I enjoyed it. After a few days and reflecting, I think 3.5 kind of describes my feelings more and kind of correlates more with like what you're given. Obviously, if the author chose to expand the story and write a full-length book with these characters and with this premise, I would read it in a heartbeat. I think the storyline definitely has room to like be expanded, and I would love to see that. It also really made me want to read more by this author because their writing style was just like amazing. I think that's like the thing that like really stood out to me was how lyrical it felt. It just felt so beautiful while you were reading it. I feel like finding fantasy standalones is really hard, so if you're wanting kind of a palate cleanser or something fast and quick, I would highly recommend this book. So the next novella I read was The Fall Risk by Abby Jimenez, and I actually listened to this on audio, like a good portion of it. It's about 80 pages, it's a romance novella, and it's about Charlotte and Seth, and they live at the same apartment complex, and I guess there's renovations being done. And one day they come out into the hallway and the stairs leading up to their apartment are just gone. And instead of relocating to a hotel for a few days, they just decide to quarantine themselves upstairs, and they just kind of hang out with each other, and over time a fun like friendship kind of develops and grows. I ended up rating this a 4 stars. Abby Jimenez never disappoints, even in novellas. I feel like that's really hard to do because you have to accomplish a lot in so little time with novellas, and Abby Jimenez did exactly that. Obviously, because it's a novella, there is a little bit of insta love, but I could look past it. It was still cute. I also feel like Abby Jimenez did a good job of incorporating the rom-com, but also having real, deep problems in the book. The main female character, Charlotte, she is dealing with something that a lot of women are dealing with, and Seth, the main male character, just takes it in strides, and I loved it. Like, there's this one scene where she invites him for coffee, and he's like, oh, you can come in, and there's like just a little bit of hesitancy, and Seth, the main male character, just like notices it right away, and he's like, hey, we don't need to go in my apartment. Why don't I bring some chairs out in the hallway and we can hang out there? And just like little things like that just like really speaks volumes, because Charlotte did not have to like voice her discomfort. He just like knew, and I loved that. Not to mention, I feel like Seth is such a cute main male character. He's like an arborist, so there's a lot of like tree puns, which I loved. I would highly recommend listening to this on audio because the audio is narrated by a male and female. So all of Charlotte's chapters are narrated by a female, and then all of Seth's chapters are narrated by a male. However, this is what I loved. This is like what really got me, is that when they have conversations, they are still narrated by like male and female, so it just feels like they're having a conversation, and it feels very immersive. I think that's like why I really enjoyed it, because I was just like working on these like fun coloring pages I have, and I was listening to the audio, and it just felt like I could see it all happening, which really does not happen for me. Okay, I do not picture things when I read. It's like an emotion for me. It's like a feeling, it's a vibe. And in my head, I could see it like a movie. Like, it was just so cute. So the final book I read during March was Summer in the City by Alex Aster. This is her newest release, and it is also her debut as a romance author. And I actually went to her signing event promoting this book, and it was amazing. I had a blast. Meeting her was probably the highlight of my year, I'm not gonna lie. She is like one of my favorite authors, and she was so sweet, so personable. My biggest flex right now is that she did repost my little Instagram story about meeting her. So there we have it. That is my flex of the year. But this book is about Elle, and she is a screenwriter, and she's experiencing a bit of writer's block while writing a movie about New York City, which she hates, by the way. So to kind of combat this lack of creativity, she decides to move to New York City for a summer and really just immerse herself into the movie and the writing process. And while she's in New York, she runs into tech billionaire Parker, who she also happens to hate. It's kind of slight enemies to lovers, and it also turns out he's her next door neighbor. So like I mentioned earlier, it's slight enemies to lovers, it's fake dating, it's a billionaire romance, it's forced proximity, it's neighbors to lovers, and I loved every single minute of it. I ended up rating this book a 4.75. I absolutely loved it. It's cheesy, but like in the best way possible, and it's just hands down the definition of a rom-com. Going into this book, I was a little bit worried that I would not like it, mainly because I've only read Alex Aster in a fantasy setting, so there was a slight possibility that I would not like her as a romance author, but it's safe to say that I do love Alex Aster in all genres. If she ever chose to write another contemporary romance, I would definitely pick it up. I feel like you can tell that Alex Aster was originally a fantasy author because this book feels so magical. Even though it's about a real place like New York City, it just has this like magical feeling, this magical vibe. It just makes you want to like pack up your bags and like go to New York City and go to all the places they talk about and just romanticize every single thing, which is crazy to say because I've been to New York City and it smells. Like, is it fun? Is there great food and great shopping and great shows? Yes, but it smells. And I feel like the New York City that they talk about in this book is just like different than the one I've been to. Like, I don't know how else to describe it, but it just like feels magical. It feels atmospheric in a way. I absolutely loved Parker, our main male character, and his love language is acts of service and gift giving, and you can try to fight me on that because that is him to a T and I ate it up. Like, he literally buys her a coffee shop at one point because they stopped making the scone that she likes. Like, if that isn't love, I don't know what is. The one thing that kept it from being a 5-star read for me is the fact that it wasn't dual POV. I feel like having Parker's POV would have added so much. I feel like having his inner thoughts would have just like completed my entire reading experience. So that's kind of why it wasn't a 5-star for me. Overall, I would highly recommend this book if you're looking for a fun, lighthearted, cheesy rom-com of a read. It does deal with some deeper topics, like it isn't all just rainbows and sunshine, but I feel like it's definitely more rom-com than literary fiction if you get my drift. Like, it is just a good, fun time. So those are all the books I read during March. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up. Comment down below how many books you read during March and what your favorite read was, or if you've read any of the books that I just mentioned and what you thought of them. I would love to chat in the comments below. And yeah, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of my videos, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.